Greetings, conservatives. This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more ConservaCast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss. This week, Jamal Bowman won the Democrat primary for the 16th U.S. Congressional District in New York. Now, the reason why I think this is kind of big news is that it may be a bellwether for what's about to happen come November of this year. Now, he not only won the Democrat primary, he won it against a very established candidate. He'd been there for many years. Eliot Engel, because he was an establishment, quote unquote, Democrat, he has now been unseated by an up-and-coming, very far-left candidate, Jamal Bowman. Now, this could be a bellwether for what's about to happen in 2020, or it could be more of an outlier. Jamal Bowman is very similar, has very similar political ideas as Alexandria or Ocasio-Cortez, I believe is how you pronounce her name, otherwise known as AOC. Now, the liberals are having a field day with this. How do I know? Well, I would strongly never suggest that any of you tune in to a program or platform known as the Young Turks. Allow me to do it for you. Oftentimes, I'll check out some of their videos just to kind of see what the left is talking about. The Young Turks is a far left, liberal, very much, admittedly, progressive platform. I won't go too far into them, but they had their heads exploded when Trump won. Now, in context, there were a lot of Republicans and conservatives who also were beside themselves that President Trump had won. But they are having a field day with Jamal Bowman winning the Democrat primary because they're very much anti-establishment, even for the Democrats. They are self-admitted far lefties. And so when the news came out this week that Jamal Bowman won the primary, they were all happy. They had him on their show. They supported him throughout the election. And they're just thrilled that they now have another one of their own, because they also supported AOC in her campaign, joining Congress. Now, the reason why it's a foregone conclusion that Jamal Bowman will win, not only has Jamal Bowman won the primary, but it's a foregone conclusion that he will win the general election because there really is no Republican or conservative representation in that district. Now, to be fair, there is a conservative party candidate because nobody filed in the Republican primary. That's how deep Democrat that congressional seat is. And Eliot Engel, for, I want to say, probably 16 years, maybe, was the congressman from that district. And since he's been unseated, there could be a signaling of other seats that may flip, of other establishment Democrat candidates. Now, I say establishment with some qualifiers because the Democrat Party is moving more and more and more, and has been moving far to the left in recent years, especially, but even for decades. So, another important thing to point out is that one of the reasons why Eliot Engel was considered an establishment Democrat candidate or politician was that he was pro-Israel, even as a Democrat. And for those of you who do know, the Democrat Party as a whole has been moving further and further away from supporting Israel. Fewer and fewer Democrat politicians will readily admit to supporting Israel. Now, some still outliers, maybe Chuck Schumer, Nadler. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Jerry Nadler, that is. But very few, especially young Democrats, will admit to supporting Israel or their right to exist or just any type of support for Israel. The majority are moving towards pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel type of sentiments. Now, to what degree they are is dependent on each politician. But the Israel lobby has now lost even one of the Democrats that support it. And the Republican Party, for the most part, by and large, has been pro-Israel. So that's why I think this is kind of big news. And if you don't follow politics deeply or you don't tune into the left or the other side, this is something to take note of, I think. Because if Jamal Bowman is kind of the canary in the minefield, so to speak, canary in the coal mine, it may signal potentially other places that will have a swing towards the left and possibly even the general election for president. I still strongly think that President Trump will win. That's gone down from about maybe a 90% odds to possibly about a 75% odds, and it starts to kind of decrease a little bit, but I still think he has more than a better shot of winning, despite all the news, despite all of the negativity, despite all of the pessimistic headlines that are out there. I think the silent majority is bigger now than it has been even when he first got elected. And many of you may agree with this, and I'm just kind of preaching to the choir, but I think the left and the media are doing more harm than good for themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot by being so overwhelmingly proselytizing in their viewpoints and what they're trying to get across that it is upsetting a lot of people. It's turning a lot more people off. They already had, and this country is already so divided. But I think they're giving more people cause to do what they did in 2016 than they realize. Even though it looks bad, even though there's a lot of reasons why President Trump is in danger of not winning re-election. Now, we'll see how things go. There is kind of an upswing on what's happening with COVID, with the rioters. I believe even Seattle is starting to maybe calm down. I don't know. I don't want to talk about that today. But getting back to what I was saying about Jamal Bowman, the problem with the left gaining this seat is that it gives more fuel to the fire because it only takes a handful of people to cause a change, to cause influence. Now, that's true on both sides. So that's why it's important that conservatives stay informed, conservatives stay involved, conservatives stay active. Because on both sides, there is a possibility for influence, for power. Now, this country is starting to have a cultural shift. For better or for worse, there's a cultural shift that's very apparent. I don't think it's nearly as much as the hype out there, my personal opinion. And that's what's going to lead me into the next thing I want to talk about. But wrapping this issue up, if Jamal Bowman is an indication of what's to come, and what Senate seats, congressional seats, may switch to the Democrats, even if President Trump gets reelected, and the down ballot goes blue, boy, the Democrat Party is not going to hold back. Not that they have, but they are going to be so far to the left. We're just going to be, I think, in a kind of stalemate for another 2 years, if not 4. Which means President Trump very well could cave in some areas because he has no choice. He could stand his ground, and basically nothing progresses any further, and he's literally a lame duck for his second 4 years. Or worst case scenario, he actually doesn't get reelected. I think that's not a likely scenario. But what may be more likely is that there's more of that stalemate, because there is so much animosity towards him that if he gets reelected, his second term is just going to be a lame duck. The Democrats will just stonewall everything that he tries to do. I'm optimistic that he will not only still win, but that the Senate will be retained and the House will not. Basically, what we have at this very moment. However, even with that scenario, there is a possibility that AOC will take over, basically spearheading a whole nother kind of revolution in, in the House of Representatives. Her ilk, the squad, whatever you want to call them, this freshman class, these newbies coming up, are a result of that cultural shift that I mentioned that I want to get into now. Now, folks, I'm going to say something that is not very popular. Many of you watching this are going to be upset with what I'm about to say, but you also may appreciate what I'm about to say. Much of the decline of our society and our culture, I believe, is in large part the breakdown of the family. Now, that can sound very cliche, that can sound very general, but specifically, divorce. Now, as I said, many of you who are watching this may be divorced. But as somebody who is not divorced and sees the conservative movement kind of confused and at a crossroads as to, well, what's going on? Why are these rioters just taking over so many places and getting so much attention and having so much effect? There are a number of reasons, but one of them that I think conservatives should be looking at, so a little bit of introspection about who we are. Divorce plays a huge role in our culture and the dynamics of the family, and as a result, what the next generation will do, how they respond to things. The children of divorced parents are extremely influenced by that divorce. Now, divorce has become so common that it's not even given a second thought. But if we consider that when children are raised in a broken home, or specifically, especially without a father for guidance, for mentorship, the outcome is that they oftentimes will turn to other influences, whether it's the government, whether it's their friends, whether it's professors at college, whether it's a whole list of things, but it's not the ideal healthy influence. And so when we see on TV a lot of younger people, or maybe not so young, but still products of divorced homes, we have to consider, well, perhaps they're acting out. Now, obviously, these are adults. They're accountable for their actions. I'm not excusing anybody for what they're doing. All I'm saying is that there is a cycle that happens, and it builds from a child to an adult. There are influences that will affect a person's adult behavior. And when a lot of these children have been affected by this divorce, they may carry themselves and conduct themselves and gravitate towards a influence to fill that parental role that might be the government. In other words, socialist ideas, left-wing ideology. That becomes their daddy, that becomes their mommy, that becomes that collective, we have to fend for ourselves because there wasn't that parent in the home, or at least consistently in the home. And in extreme cases, they may have been the victims of abuse oftentimes, because enter in a step parent. Maybe that step parent doesn't really want children or doesn't care for children, or may just in some way cause more harm to that child. There are a number of scenarios. My point is just that there is such a high frequency of divorce and broken homes and lack of leadership and parental guidance that it's not surprising that there is one generation, two generations of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, maybe tens of millions, depending on what statistics you're looking at, who have been raised in a single parent home or a broken, abusive home, who may gravitate towards a government influence, a social program influence. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a number of good people who have come from broken homes. I don't want to paint such a broad brush, but the frequency of having misguidance is a lot higher among divorced homes. Now, because I'm speaking about conservative issues, there are probably just as many conservatives as liberals these days who may be divorced, especially even in the church, or those who claim to be religious conservatives, Christian conservatives. Now, what happens when a conservative Christian or somebody who claims to be religious is divorced? Oftentimes, there is a loss of moral authority. Because critics, understandably so, will say, well, how hypocritical of you to try and point your finger about social issues, about societal issues. You couldn't even keep your marriage together. For whatever reason it is, whether it's adultery, abuse, finances, whatever the case is, that is still the depiction. Who are you as a divorced person to talk about same-sex marriage? How can you be against that? How can you be against same-sex marriage or relationships if you can't even handle your opposite sex, your heterosexual marriage? How can you talk about abortion when you're not even caring for your children, or you've caused more harm to your children? How do you speak about X, Y, and Z if you're not actually living that out? Now, to be fair, every human being is flawed. Again, I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush. Are there reasons for divorce? Technically, even in Scripture, there is the provision for things like adultery. But much like, and I don't want to conflate the two, but much like abortion, marriage can sometimes be seen as something that can be absolved if it's inconvenient. I don't get along with my spouse. You weren't the right one for me. I'm just not feeling it anymore. And so there's a no-fault divorce or just irreconcilable differences. And so that goes into telling the children of that family or broken home, Well, mom and dad basically gave up on themselves and me, whatever the situation may be, however justified the parents may be. The impression on the child is, who are you to tell me? Who are other people like you to tell me when you're being very hypocritical? Now, I say all this knowing that it's going to be controversial, knowing that it's going to put salt on the wounds for a lot of people. But I think it's important that we be honest, that we do have that introspection of ourselves, that we take a look at some of the causes of what's going on around us, to not be so quick to just say them and look at us. Now, there are conservative pundits, there are conservative commentators, there are conservative radio hosts, TV hosts who are divorced. And all other aspects of their lives, they very well are conservatives. But it's kind of that accepted flaw because there are so many divorces, even among conservatives. There is such a high frequency of divorce in our society that it's not really addressed or talked about. Unless, again, you're old-fashioned, you're considered prude, you're considered square, a nerd, unrealistic. Now, thank God, my marriage has remained intact. We have children. There's no indication of divorce by any means. We have our moments. We're human. We're flawed. We argue. We make up. There's a constant need to keep our marriage together. And so I'll just wrap this up by saying, if we want to start addressing the bigger picture, we should really look at ourselves. Now, if you're divorced and you are a conservative and you feel that you have conservative values and you may even regret your divorce, or you may have have asked for forgiveness of your divorce. Maybe your divorce happened before you had some type of coming to a place in your life where you may not have been divorced after that point. I'm getting a little tongue-tied here because I'm trying to be generous and graceful. To say that just because you are divorced doesn't mean that you can't still engage in the conservative movement. You can't still do things to promote other conservative ideas. My point is just to be aware of how much of a contribution either your divorce or other people's divorces have been to what we are experiencing right now. I may revisit this topic again at another point. It is a very sensitive topic, I understand. But I guess my main point is just before we start pointing fingers, let's start taking a look at ourselves. How do we move on from that? There are a number of ways. There's counseling, there's prayer, there's reconciliation with maybe some of your children, other people's children, maybe admitting to the divorce not necessarily being the right decision that may have been made and coming to grips with that. Maybe there are outliers, as I said, where that needed to happen, but still trying to reach out to others. Lastly, I'll end with this. As of the production of this ConservaCast, Israel is about to annex a good portion of the West Bank. By the time this is put out, and you may be seeing this, Israel may have already annexed that portion of the West Bank. Now, there is a possibility that they may not. There is some pressure, there is some request and desire for them not to, usually from some of the same people, the UN, the European Union, people who aren't very friendly to Israel. But I believe Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, will go ahead and move forward with the annexation. But not knowing the future, making a prediction, As I said, if you're watching this, there may be a possibility that he did not annex it. Now, that gets into the weeds of something more in depth with the state of Israel and the two-state solution and the progression of expanding their borders into what I believe is rightfully theirs within the territory. So it's just something to keep a lookout on, because if they do annex it, they could signal other types of animosity. There possibly could be a short-term conflict, military conflict, whether it's from Gaza on the southern west side, or from the Palestinians, the Palestinians within the West Bank itself. Possibly even a much larger conflict. So just something to keep an eye out on in the days ahead and the weeks ahead, that we would like to keep Israel in our thoughts and prayers, that they don't incur the wrath of others who would not want that to happen. And lastly, just to wrap all of this up, I'd like to strongly encourage each of you to know that you have far more influence than you think. Talk to your neighbor, talk to your family, talk to the people at church, talk to people in person standing in the line of a grocery store, at any event that you're at. I know right now, because of COVID and some restrictions in certain areas of the country, that's not as possible to do. But do not stay silent. Do not for a second think that you can't cause some change to occur. Even the slightest, whether it's to encourage people to think about something differently, whether it's to dispel some of the hype and hyperbole and groupthink that's out there. You would be surprised if you just spoke up, and the look that somebody else will give you, the shock or surprise that, well, I thought about that too. There is a ripple effect that happens. And I think a lot of times, especially conservatives, we may get discouraged and just be so overwhelmed by what we see on the news, see on our computer screens, on our phones, to just say, wow, this world is just going crazy. This country is just lost. Do not give up the fight. Talk to people directly. Question what's going on in the news. People, I don't know how many times people have even initiated and just asked, hey, do you think what's really going on is really going on? And oh my goodness, that opens up the floodgate. When I'm asked, I'll just start going off, because then they've initiated for me. But even if I haven't been asked, if I talk to somebody, and I'll just strike up a short conversation, small talk. Hey, see what's going on out there? I don't really think that, what's being reported is really accurate. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, but I thought I was the only one. Trust me. Even if it doesn't work every time, keep doing it. Keep trying to talk about truth. Put things in context. Undermine the media, the left-wing media. Constantly throw out there I hate to use the term fake news, because it's thrown around so much, it's kind of lost its meaning. But encourage people to not fall for what's being put out there. There is a silent majority, I believe, that is still strong, that still will re-elect President Trump. Even if you don't like the guy, there are enough people, I think, and I think that number is growing, as I said at the outset of this, because the left-wing media is doing more harm to their case than good. Thanks, guys. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you will invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.